Welcome, everyone, to our presentation, A Better End, Supporting Our Communities Around Death and Dying. So we are so excited today to present our Death and Dying Committee, share our learnings, and I think there was one little thing that we can add to the description. We are also going to share some tips and strategies, some offerings that you may also feel like you can implement in your programs. And it doesn't have to be the entire Death and Dying Committee. There could be components of it, and we are going to talk about that too. So thank you so much. And I am going to turn to my brilliant and amazing co-workers here, and Cinthia and Kira, to first introduce themselves. And I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, and then we'll start.
Hi, my name is Cinthia, Vega Gabriele. I'm a service coordinator in supportive housing at Community Access, and I work at the Lower East Side as well as scatter sites.
Hi everyone, my name is Edekira Liberato, and I am a supported education specialist at Blueprint, which is a community engagement program at Community Access.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm Duysal. I work at the training department for Community Access, and I think I'm really excited. My voice is shaking with excitement because this is a very, very important dear topic to me. I also work from a trauma-informed perspective and understanding death and dying and the trauma, and also creating communities and then creating communications and creating engagements around this topic is so dear to me. And so here we go. We are going to start with the regulars. Who we are as an agency. So this is our mission statement that I'm going to read out loud. Community Access, expand opportunities for people living with mental health concerns to recover from trauma and discrimination through affordable housing, training, advocacy, and healing-focused services. We are built upon the simple truth that people are experts in their own lives. So this is, in a nutshell, our agency mission. So our agency have been founded almost 50 years ago. As you see in the slide, it is just founded by friends, family members, some activists coming together, renting and renovating apartments in the Lower East Side. After almost 50 years, now we have low threshold supportive housing throughout Bronx, Manhattan, and Brooklyn. We do have an amazing Howdy Harp advocacy center doing prayer trainings, very proud. We also have a peer-operated respite center, mobile teams, art collective, self-direction program, supported education program, and also adult home initiative program and more. I'm gonna definitely talk a little bit about how those programs and how this topic is important. So in a nutshell, this is what CA is. And now, moving to our topic about death and dying in our community.
Hi, everyone. Our community is likely to be similar to yours in that we see a great deal of death on a regular basis. This is due to a shortened life expectancy of participants from systemic issues related to racism, classism, polypharmacy, lack of access to medical care, war and drug policies, and more. This is due to the fact that our housing is essentially serving as an NORC, naturally occurring retirement communities, where most residents have aged in place. I don't think that's what they intended when they made certain supportive housing, as we all know. But it's definitely something we have to embrace and work on. By a show of hands, how many of you have noticed this happening in your agencies? Okay. It's really hard to see and deal with. In our case, due to the folks having limited access to opportunities, they will probably never be able to afford to move anywhere else in New York City. Those that do live into their 50s and 60s and beyond are aging in our community with others until they pass on. Of course, we don't have to explain in this space how COVID and overdose death crisis has managed our increase in the ways in which, sadly, we lose our valued community members. Okay.
So I wanted to ask if anybody feels comfortable sharing. What are some challenges and barriers that you see in your programs and organizations around death and dying?
My social workers and my counselors are very reluctant to have the conversations with our folks who are aging.
Okay. Yeah.
Can everyone hear that? No. Okay.
The service providers in my agency seem to be very reluctant to have these conversations with folks who are now aging.
Yeah.
Around, planning for that illness, wills, and those type of things.
And I think that has a lot to do with people not wanting to enter to that topic. People don't want to believe that their life is coming to an end.
Yes.
So, and that plays a big part in that, people not wanting to realize that. And it's hard for people to, when you even bring up the topic of setting wills with our clients, they don't want to go into that. They don't, they try to avoid that topic.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to touch that.
Thank you for sharing.
Take over? Good.
Hi, everyone. The issue or the concern that I have is with regards to the end of life planning with tenants. They generally don't have family support, so when they die, it's just the city takes over, and that always breaks my heart, especially if I've been working with them for a long time. I just wish we were able to put a beautiful bow at the end of that, and that's what I find.
Maybe we will speak to a little bit of that, we will speak to that concern. It's heartbreaking, I'm so sorry.
In the back. I think I see a hand in the back. Like all the way in the back.
Hi. What we have done at VIP has been do living wills with our tenants, trying to prepare them to for that moment when it comes, since a lot of them don't have family members, any external support. We also do bereaving and debriefing with our staff and our tenants when somebody passes away. And we also set up a table, with a picture of the individual with flowers and candles to try to memorialize and try to keep that memory going. That's one of the things that we have done at VIP that have worked for us very well.
So good, you're already addressing some of the challenges. Amazing. Okay, on our hand, and
Hi. We try to memorialize our clients and tenants as well. Unfortunately, the pandemic has posed a big barrier for us recently. I work in a congregate setting, so space is a huge challenge. And while we did have a tenant memorial tree, we haven't yet even been able to have memorials for the last couple of years to memorialize our tenants, and we saw an increase over the last couple of years.
absolutely. We have similar concerns too. We find some alternatives, but it is definitely a challenge that we see.
I think one of the challenges is how do you support the staff and the how do you support the staff and the clients when somebody passes? I think that what happens with the staff, they build these relationships, these long relationships with the clients, and don't realize how attached they become with the clients. Yeah.
Absolutely, and we're definitely going to touch upon that concern too.
You're good? Okay. It's okay.
I think he's all good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Like
Should I advance this mic?
Okay, so hello. Okay, my bad. So like as many of you have brought up, like one of the challenges can be how to get the conversation started. And I think as you mentioned that talking about death and dying can have us face our own mortality. The reality is that is an inevitable life process. Unfortunately, in the field of work that we do, we build a lot of connections with these participants, and a lot of times we are their only support when family is not involved. So, for example, lack of knowledge of systems and how to navigate them could be something that prevents people from getting started. But I want to let you all know that none of us in this panel or in the Death and Dying Committee are grief experts. However, we've had experiences with death and dying in our own personal lives as well as within our agency, and our common interest in trying to support one another and be part of the community allowed us to start this process, which has helped us kind of talk about some of these challenges and begin addressing some of them.
Yeah, I think for lack of knowledge and advanced planning and rights, we have, it's very difficult to have that discussion with people, and depending on their culture and how they were brought up, death is taboo, something you don't talk about, you don't want to jinx it, it's something that you try to gear away from. So it's hard. And also the language that's used, especially by doctors, if they're trying to tell them that they need a healthcare proxy, they're like, what's that? Sometimes it's difficult to explain that in a different language, or if they get an interpreter, they don't feel comfortable with them. So it can become very difficult. I've had participants that have been in the hospital and they speak Spanish, and I'm translating what the translator is saying because they don't fully understand what the translator is saying, because they could be Spanish but from a different area. So it's different for them. What was
funding. So then there's
Yeah.
also like funding requirements and protocols around death in our communities. And I feel like it could be dismissive sometimes in what we've experienced to the fact that staff is also grieving. Part of our work is making these connections in order to support our participants, and the process of documenting and kind of reflecting on the work that you've done with said person could lead to increased feelings of guilt and or make staff members feel like they're at fault for or that they didn't do enough, when the reality is that we, for the most part, try to do the best that we can to be that support system for people and try to be there. So if we don't feel comfortable enough with the topic, or if we feel like we do not know enough information about how to get started, I want to challenge anyone that is interested and that has questions to use our resources. The internet is a great way to get started. When I first got interested in learning about the topic, I wanted to know more about living wills and advanced directives. And what I found is that as diverse as the New York City community is, we can find resources not just in English, but in Spanish, in Chinese, and whatever language that you might be serving for whatever population you're serving. So that is kind of how we got started.
Yeah, another challenge that we have at times is the fact that they don't, so the revolving door of employees. So many times, tenants don't feel comfortable talking to someone about the conversation. So it's kind of hard to get someone to trust you, that you have their best interest in mind. So I think just, whenever they discuss anything having to do with a family member passing or anything of that nature, I find it a real doorway into the conversation, like, oh, so how would you like to deal with that in the future? What are your wishes that you would like to do, and who would you prefer to do it with? So it's a gateway into that conversation. Some health systems have gaps also, because sometimes, like I was telling them in the past, if you have somebody that's 60 years old or older, I tend to be like, yes, I could get them all the services they need, they're older, Meals on Wheels, everything. But unfortunately, if they're younger than that and they're ill, which 95% of the time they are, then it's really difficult to get the Meals on Wheels or have somebody give them referrals. If they can't even get to the hospital to get the home health aid service, filled out the form M11Q, then it's like really difficult to get things in place for them. So those are the barriers also that we deal with.
So, not to down and demoralize everyone, these are just challenges we are starting to address, that like this is happening in our communities. And with our work, with our death and dying work group, like we try to find some remedies to some of those challenges. So I'm gonna go back to the kind of like a memory lane, and I will explain that like how this death and dying committee established, what happened, and then how it emerged. So, incident review committee, is this something familiar to you all? Yes. Yes. So, this is a committee in most programs that like people from different positions and people with lived experience, family members, they come together and they look at critical incidences happening in the program. So, and to look at it, to assess it, and to find solutions that like if there's a gap, what will be the solution? It is a very intense committee. So back in, I'm gonna say 2017 and 2016 is just like this issue about like participants dying, and it is creating an impact to the larger community, and themselves has been raising, and at that moment one of our housing directors were in charge of like doing, like there are some action steps, and then he was in charge of some of those action steps, and life happens, he got another job. And at that moment, I guess this was a task that other people couldn't handle at that moment, like they were plagued or too busy, and training department, me and my colleague, we volunteered. So the suggestion was, why don't you all do a training? Because there's generally the first suggestion is like, let's do a training. So but we were like, you know what? This is bigger than training. Training can address only one portion of it. The knowledge, the comfort level, the skills. But there's more to the story. How can we actually create a sense of community around this topic? How can we tackle? And then we were like thinking about that, and then how can we approach it in a more holistic way? Not only training. Training can be one step, but it is bigger than that. Can we create a bigger thing? And then that was the idea that all these gaps identified here from advanced planning, like health proxy document, DNR document, living wills, wills and testaments, and all those things were like documents that some people have knowledge, most people don't. Memorial and legacy planning, even though we have been doing it, there's still like people like, can we create some systems to sustain? And I'm gonna come to your point, I'm so sorry I don't know your name, about like, how can we remember and give the message to people, you matter when you're alive, and your death matters, and then we want to give a consistent message. For the person who is dead, maybe they can hear, they can see, maybe not. However, for the other people who are staying behind, then they can see that they really matter for us. And support. I think I have heard from different people that like, when people die, it impacts us. All this relationship, all the loss, all that attachment. And at the same time, we are workers. So we are grieving, and we are also supporting people who are grieving. So that's such a juggle. And overall comfort. So what we try to do is, can we create, like let's make an assessment and see if if there are people in our agency, as staff members, are interested in doing something bigger than trainings in this community. So we did an event, which I'm going to talk more detail about that event, and then we see that there are a lot of staff interested. And we decided, you know what, let's create a work group. So the work group structure, and then death and dying committee started like that. The structure is this way, like I'm going to go over every bullet point. There is project manager or a project manager. So I am one of the project managers for this death and dying committee, because this is a work group. So you do your own work, and along with your work, or on top of your work, you have to do other things. So that requires planning, that requires organizing, and we are so grateful that staff are interested, but we didn't want to give more and more. So like we take kind of ownership, and let us project manage and do the logistical part, from scheduling to notes and creating agendas and follow-ups, all that stuff. So it is such a crucial step to have one or two people be in charge of that, so there can be a continuity. The second thing that we were very, very intentional is inclusion in different programs for different roles. So we didn't want to create a committee where there's a lot of people who are from like a senior management role. And what we wanted is more either direct service workers or program directors, assistant program directors, like where people are really directly working with individuals. So we can create a dynamic committee, and it is not like the senior management heavy. And then sometimes we were lucky enough to have a person in our committee that like who has been lived through the crisis, the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and then they had special expertise to bring our work group. So we were lucky to have him. And that is one thing. And then again, different programs. We have housing programs, but Kira said right now she works at the supported education program. So it is not only housing programs, but non-housing programs like also impacted by this topic. So we started this committee in 2018. This is pre-COVID. And at that moment, if we will give this presentation, probably like we will talk about like maybe more about the death and dying. Now everybody is really seeing that like this is happening and this is impacting at a larger scale. And one thing that we were doing is Zoom, very important detail that like even before COVID, we were using Zoom. So people working in different programs can participate, but they don't have to commute, because when you commute, it also adds up to your work time. And if you're a direct service worker, you need to manage all that time. It could be very challenging. But Zoom definitely give like help with that. Like now everyone can join the Zoom, no commuting time. And subgroup and groups are decided, like there were some gaps identified, but once we had the committee established, we asked the committee members who were representative of their programs and their roles, like what are some needs that need to be assessed? And of course, advanced planning was one of them. Memorial and legacy planning was another. Support was one subgroup. And also like creating this culture where we can regularly talk about death and dying was another project, and then the subgroups. So otherwise, it will be like one committee working with multiple projects. It will be overwhelming. So by dividing the task, we were able to make more accomplishments in a smaller amount of time. And the last bullet point might seem a little bit like a small detail that like D&Ds are death and dying. Each meeting begins with an icebreaker. So I am a trainer. I am like the icebreaker person. Everything is about icebreakers. But for this particular purpose, icebreaker was like we try to model what we are trying to bring to our community. That like we are gonna go to the slide, but those icebreakers were the moments that we were also like, okay, how do we feel about talking about death and dying and anything else? And then there were so many intimate, very deep conversations were revolving around it. And then we were kind of knowing each other at a different level, as a different person. And then I'm gonna move to icebreaker in a shortly, but there is one essential part that like having these conversations that you also bring yourself to the conversation. You bring your expertise, you bring your personal experience. So your personal and professional is kind of like collapsing with each other. And luckily in our agency we can do that, like we can bring ourselves to the relationship. So now the big reveal, icebreaker question.
Okay, so again, our main goal is to create a safe space for and normalize the conversation around death and dying. And like Duysal stated, one of the ways in which we could start this conversation is through icebreakers. So I want everyone to take a couple of seconds to just take a look at these questions, and if you feel brave enough to answer any of them, just raise your hand. I'm gonna get started. Some of these would challenge you to be more vulnerable than others. You don't have to pick all of them, just whatever feels comfortable to you. One that I usually like is, would you like to know when or how you would die and why? I sometimes, depending on the day, I want to know. But most of the time, my answer is no, because I feel like it will take the joy away from living. I actually had a parent who died from a terminal illness, and because they knew those last couple of months were really difficult because you're kind of counting down. So because I experienced that, for me, I personally wouldn't want to know, just kind of live life and try to treat everybody well so that once you move on, they can remember you. So do we have any takers? No, maybe? Anybody?
Well, okay. Go ahead.
What song do you want played? Take Me to the Kingdom.
Oh.
That's my song.
Love it.
No question about it. I don't need that. At least I don't think I need it, but.
No, that's beautiful.
That's beautiful, yeah. Have you told anybody this besides this crowd?
No, we just did. I assume that's something that I do
Yeah.
because I'm doing wrong. I assume because my sisters and them know that's my favorite song that they all play it. But that's what I did with my sister. She sung a song in Spanish in church. She's known for, so I played that. So I'm assuming they would know.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe that's what I'm doing wrong.
No, not necessarily wrong, but I feel like our level of comfort varies, even in our own personal lives. I think the topic of death could bring up a lot of negative energy, and a lot of people don't want to deal with that. Yet at the same time, once you're not there, you want your wishes to be honored. So having that conversation and expressing your wants and needs makes a difference, especially for the people you leave behind. Yeah. Anybody
I think
else?
that-
No?
oh, okay.
In the front.
There's one hand in the front,
Mhm.
I think. Thank you.
Hi, I can do two of them. So for the first one, share a movie you like about death and dying, The Notebook, right? So
It always comes up.
yes, a great love story, and you end up dying together with the person you love. Absolutely love that. And of course, it was my introduction to Alzheimer's and dementia, and then I have actually had someone in my life see them go through it and now pass away from it. So that's that. And then the other one, talk about a celebrity or famous persons that deeply affected you. Well, it's a toss-up, but what deeply affected me was, so I'm from the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, and there was a a well-known pastor. His name was Dr. Miles Monroe, and he's like so known. And the way he died is that his plane crashed into a garbage dump. So it was like, what? A pastor, a man of the cloth? How could he die this way after all that he's done? And it really, it took me a long time to process that, and even my own spirituality and what does that mean, I'm like, no, he needs to be more respected. How could he die this way?
Yeah.
So that's that. And of course, Whitney Houston is my second person. I absolutely love Whitney. She's, for me, the #1 singer of all time. So just her entire story, and then her daughter's story, it just grasps you at the heart, and you just think about people's life, Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much sharing. Okay, I think we have another. And this is exactly what happens in our groups too. First we start slow, and then the ice starts to break and melt.
So for the song that I would want to play would be I'll Be Missing You. I think, yeah. And then I'll answer the last one. What would be the ideal scenario? I think I don't want to feel pain, so definitely in my bed, and definitely cremation. I always joke up to my family about this. I said, if you dare to bury me, I'm coming back and scratching your feet.
Thank you for sharing. I got here and then there.
In another presentation, I will ask you, what would you do when you come back?
That'll be a fun question to answer. So for me, the one I'm going to answer, what would you do if you found out you only had 1 month to live? So I would eat all of my favorite foods every single day.
Yeah.
and not care about any type of calorie or food, or if I get an upset stomach, so, you know, the pizza, the lobster, all the fried foods that you're not supposed to eat, or just fry everything. So even stuff that doesn't get fried, but you only find them at like food festivals and stuff.
Yes.
So, because it's just kind of like, what would be the point? But then, and then kind of figure out what would be the best way to do that. Do I want to cook that food? Do I want to just eat that food at a fancy restaurant? Do I want to order that food in and eat with pajamas? It's just a month.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's a month that has 31 days and not 28.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to just change one of the questions because celebrity famous person, I lost 3 staff members in the last year or two from COVID, 1 day apart. And it really affected our entire organization. And fortunately, our organization is large enough to have had a Zoom memorial meeting for every single building where the names of the deceased, both residents and staff, were read. And that was very, very comforting. And I'd just like to suggest, if you want to be cremated, sign the form, because sometimes your relatives won't allow it.
Yeah. Well, so, thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Okay, so
I guess one more.
One last. Yeah.
I was going to say, if I had 1 month to live, I'd probably respond to all of those pre-approved credit cards. And I'd probably run up a large tab, go on a couple vacations and cruises, and live a good life for a month.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would do that too. So nice. I mean, this was a pre-replica of what is happening, that like some of these answers brought joy, warm our heart. Some of them are bittersweet, but it always starts slow and then you continue. And like we have to cut off, generally we cut our meetings, like because otherwise we will spend the entire meeting with icebreaker questions. Now, moving to a little bit, I'm going to talk about what we have done. The first one that again, at the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that like we did a screening, and being mortal with Atul Gawande, unfortunately, we won't be able to bring the person of Atul Gawande, but the documentary was done by him, and that was so important that like when we bring it with the participants and stuff, we see the interest in people. And we have another committee member in the crowd, Carlene, big shout out to her. I remember her participating, and it's just like it was really a good moment to see that. And now I am like, physically I can really turn myself to Kira that talks about the Day of the Dead event, and then I'm going to add a little bit more to that.
Okay. So one of the kickoff events that we did to kind of get the conversation started was Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, which is traditionally celebrated in Latin America and originated in Mexico. This usually happens November 1st and 2nd. So with inspiration to this Latin American tradition, we had our participants bring pictures or items of someone that they wanted to remember or celebrate. Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, is a celebration of life and death. So like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when we hear the word death, there's a negative connotation with it, when something that we'd like to do is honor the person that's no longer with us, celebrate their life and whatever impact they had in our lives. So we have the most turnout, as I'm sure some of you can relate to, when there's food involved in any of the groups. So at the time I was also doing cooking groups, so I thought what a great way of like just kind of bringing everybody together and kind of getting the topic started then, cooking A meal for everyone, sitting around eating dinner style. We watched a couple of clips. One of them was from the movie Up. One of them was from the bucket list. And all of these were tools to kind of ask questions to our participants about how do they feel about death and dying. What are some things that you want to happen for you to be remembered? And the biggest takeaway for me was having participants that, for example, were not in speaking terms with like a sibling and saying, this group inspired me to reach out because you never know. And I thought that was beautiful. There's also like using like playlists with songs, like some of you shared what song you would like. So I say that to say that although it can be a very serious topic, there's a way of facilitating the conversation so that everyone can feel a little more comfortable or be a little bit more vulnerable.
So this was again pre-COVID time. We started strong and then COVID happened. We continue a little bit slower in terms of gatherings and events. So we did 2 other programs, and in each program, it looked different. In one program, we scheduled the event and then we sent the packages and preps, and sadly they lost a participant right before the meeting. So it was a totally different vibe. And then it was a very strong program who had a strong vision. Like culturally, the program knew how they want to celebrate the life of the person that they lost. Like it was beautiful. And you are seeing the mural that you see here. It was the wall of the program that was created with many program participants, and the person who died also participated in that mural. And as to remember them, they planted a tree, probably not the cherry tree, but like right there in the hard to see. It is still there, and then people can remember. That was another event coincided. And the third event focused on advanced directives and talking about advanced directives, healthcare proxies, do not resuscitate forms, living wills, and then people have a discussion about it. So each 3 of them were amazing, but each 3 of them were different because every program had a different need at that moment, and every program has a different culture, and every program created something. Like we came with our offerings, and then it was tweaked based on what also they need, which was very lovely. And this memorial packages and managers for program, like it was also started at that time, that we are now building more and more into that list to give people more offerings about like when they want to remember people when they pass. They can do the celebration as the way that fits in their culture. But if they feel like a little bit, I don't know how to do it, maybe they're a new program manager, maybe the person was new, we are trying to add more offerings that include different cultural celebrations, always food. Thankfully, we have the health and wellness department, who is also part of our death and dying committee, and they are doing a lot of work on food justice and how people food bring and their relationship with food. And then that is definitely an anchoring ingredient. And then I'm looking at, again, my coworkers about our monthly support groups, which is not a therapy group. So you don't have to be a grief counselor, you don't have to be a therapist. It is a support group, and then we do it monthly. And
yeah, and it's again just creating the space for us to support one another. We had one where it was just like staff members, and then we open it up to participants. And what we find is that just like our participants are grieving, so are we. And obviously HIPAA's still a thing, and all of like those rules, but it allows the space for us to be there for one another and validate the pain that it can be to lose somebody that was an integral part of our community.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a way to have the conversations with the participants so they could feel more comfortable and have a sense of having control over their last wishes. With the advanced planning, I think we went through like if they're in hospice care, I never knew that you could decide, if I want to be fed by a other sources, right? Instead of just, saying, you know what, that's it. If I get to that point, then just let me be. And I think sometimes that's important to know, because it gives you a sense of control. And you could, like, I know for me, when they told me about the healthcare proxy, I thought of my husband at first. Then I realized, he's a hot mess, and he'll just lose it. So instead, I thought of my sister, who is more like, she's organized, very like straightforward. She'll go get, the doctors, she'll go above the doctors, whatever. So I told my husband I had to have that tough conversation after one of our meetings, actually. And I told him, I love you, but I think I'm going to make it 50-50, 50 her and 50 you, because she's going to have her head straight and you're going to just be out of it. So I need a little bit of both. Someone who really doesn't want to lose me, and someone who's willing to like go out of the way to try as much as possible and then just be okay with that.
And I want to just quickly add to that point that I think there's a misconception that you have to be terminally ill or be sick in order to get started in any of these things. You can literally go online right now and fill out a healthcare proxy form. You do need a witness to sign just to make sure that, like, your wishes are being respected and somebody's there. But these are forms that are easily found online. They come in multiple languages. They explain everything that they mean. There are differences in between a living will and a healthcare proxy. A healthcare proxy, very, very important if you can make medical decisions for yourself. So I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't done so or you haven't looked into it, to just consider that, because, again, you never know.
I think I'm going to say one more thing about our monthly support meetings, because what is happening in our field that everything, I think, becomes very professionalized and then sadly very clinicized. And sometimes people don't start those groups, those support groups, but they feel like, but I am not either a licensed clinician, or I am not a grief counselor, or I am not a psychologist. And however, this is not a therapy group. We are not providing therapy. This is not a treatment group. What we are doing is supporting each other and having these conversations. And then even before these professions were found, people were having these conversations with each other. Actually, we have in ourselves that wisdom, and we can have these conversations regardless of our licenses. Like, that is doable, but I feel like the field give us some kind of messages as if we cannot have these conversations in the form of support group, bringing ourselves, talking about it. And in those support groups, we talk about death, we talk about grief, we talk about rituals, we talk about like what people would need after someone passes away, from coworkers when it was staff only. So we did have all these conversations to support each other, think together, like think about the rituals, and it was very wealthy, it was rich, and we were able to take care of each other, because sometimes it brings a lot of intense feelings, and we find a way to get out of that intense feeling by supporting each other, by feel supported by each other. So that is definitely one thing that, if you are questioning that, like, can I do that? We are going to talk about like what are some things that is needed for that. But those support meetings in the form of mutually being there for each other is possible. And Cinthia mentioned about this advanced planning workshops, and so we didn't start. None of us started this work group knowing everything and anything about all these forms. So some of us knew maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead, but most of us were like, okay, I don't know the nitty-gritties of it. What we did is, for advanced planning workshops, we reached out to other community organizations, and thankfully they come, and we didn't have to pay for them. It was also fitting their agenda. So they talk about these documents, what they are, what happens if you don't have them, and also, as Cinthia mentioned, that some of them are resources for people over 60, that like you can start the conversation, as Kira said, you can download the document, start filling out, and then get services from community organizations. That was really good for us to like bringing them and starting the ball running. And the bullet points that was in the previous slide and the first part is kind of embody the spirit of death and dying. Like there's a spirit there. We want to talk about it. We want to break the ice. We don't want to make it taboo. And then now we are going to talk a little bit about the mechanics. Like what are some mechanical things that we did? Like guidance documents.
Okay, so like some of the things that we've done. So for example, like after like this conversation, how many of you feel comfortable by a raise of hands starting a conversation around death and dying in your programs? That's great. I'm glad. You guys could hear me, right? Like I don't need. Okay, great. So some of the things that we've discussed as a committee that can be helpful is making our working spaces a safe space to talk about the topic. So something that is always helpful are visual aids, such as sharing pamphlets, making information accessible to your participants and staff, having signs, again, visual aids, such as ask me about advance directives, or let's talk about living wills. Another thing that we've mentioned like before is how do we remember participants that pass in our communities, because it does set an example for other participants and what to expect once they're no longer with us. So making sure that we're, again, trying to celebrate their life, letting them know that they matter in our communities, whether it is through events, memorials, in the programs, are all important. And I know I've said it already, but we don't have to wait until someone is terminally ill or in that stage to begin the conversation. Sometimes it could be as simple as, what song would you like to have played if something happens, or who would you want to be there? And it's just that foot in the door that allows for the conversation to flow and for participants to share, like, hey, I don't know anything about advanced planning. What do you know? And if you don't know, learning moment for both of y'all.
Yeah, I think I also had an experience, one of the participants who's like a family or a friend passed away, and he was discussing, you know, everything they were doing for him and how they're trying to search for money to figure out everything. And I'm like, you know, how would you like to pass on? And he was just like, well, I want to be wrapped in a white cloth, and, you know, I don't want to be cremated, and I just want to be wrapped in a white cloth and buried. And that was very specific, so I asked him if he was interested in speaking to the legal advisor that would be able to help him do the living will and all these different forms, and he said yes. And once I did that, he contacted the lawyer, and the lawyer emailed me all the documents. I helped him fill them all out. And now it's like, not only does he have it, but we as an agency have it for him, so we can make sure that these wishes are met, at least with the family, that they're aware of what he wants. So.
Yep. All these stories warming my heart. If we continue with the mechanics, yes, eventually we created a training. And I think I made a mistake as a presenter. I used an acronym without saying what it is. LMS means Learning Management System. So in our agency, we do have a learning management system that we can upload online trainings that people can take it whenever they want based on within their work schedule. This shouldn't stop anyone. Like, this is just like, it was accessible to us. It was there in our agency. However, the training, we did it like, I think, within a week of COVID hit. So, because it was the moment that like everything was really impacting our staff. Within a week, we put things very quickly together, and then we are improving it. Like, we are talking about advanced directives. We are talking about how to navigate the system. If you are coming from a marginalized community, what are some tips? Linking people with resources. We talk about grief. We talk about alternative memorials, because at that moment, it was just the beginning of COVID, and people weren't be able to do the memorials as the way they wanted to. So we provided these in that training, and then we are updating and changing and improving it as we go. And lately we are reviewing and updating policies in collaboration with our senior administration. So this is, again, there is a committee, and then they are representing different voices, and sometimes Some issues are, for example, healthcare. Like when we think of health proxy document, as an agency, we have a policy that, like, as a staff member, we cannot be their agent to decide. That is to protect the staff members to feel that, like, they are going to be in a position and they don't want to make medical decisions for participants. But at the same time, what is your name? Because you mentioned that point. Yes, sorry. Lovely, Karen. Yes. Lashan, thank you. Lashan mentioned that participant didn't have a family member, and we definitely have similar stories. People are lonely and isolated, some of them, sadly. And it is not a solitude, it's not a choice. If they were given a choice, they wouldn't want to be in that loneliness. Their life goes with loneliness and isolation, and their death sadly revolves around that too. So as staff members, we cannot be healthcare proxies, but most of the time, if some of our direct service workers have a long-standing relationship, and they can be the closest thing that the person wants. So like we also had that discussion with the senior management, like, is there a possibility? Can we think of some situations that, like, maybe with that policy, can we do something different? So like we are still trying to continue that conversation, because even though the policy is there to protect the staff and the participants so there's no conflict of interest, but in some situations it's actually a barrier. And another thing that happens, and then I am thinking it might happen in your work too. So you work with individuals. One day you enter their apartment and you find them dead. And I know that it happened to two of my colleagues. And it is very, very traumatic. So when that happened, one thing that we advocated is just like, okay, about the PTOs. And then one thing that happened is, for that day, they can take the day off. They don't have to use their own PTO. Now we're in the middle of, in the process, in the works of, in addition to that, like you can take the rest of the day off. But in addition to that, can we also add another PTO just for that specific, and it's in the works, we are not finalized. It was not a no from our senior management, so it just needs some logistical support and help. But it's going, because it is happening for direct service workers, and I don't know if there's anybody here working in the facilities. Yep, it happens to our supers more often.
Yeah, it's traumatizing to walk in there and see someone that you cared for such a long period of time, and to see them pass on. It's really difficult, especially, I don't know if you've dealt with this before, but EMS, we were talking about it earlier, they really sometimes have a little, like, no regard. Maybe it's not EMS, it's 911 more. When you're calling them, they're telling you to revive them or to try to do something to help them. And when you know that the person has gone, they still continue to push. And it's really difficult to deal with that. And the participants coming around saying what's going on, and you're trying to navigate that and navigate this, and it's just like very overwhelming. And then you got to do an incident report. So it's really difficult. So yeah.
Sorry, let her go first, and then Michelle. Yeah.
You guys hear me?
With the
I'm happy you brought that up, because what I find when we find a tenant deceased, it's a lot of things going on. You want to grieve, but as a manager, I'm always thinking, do we have documentation like this? you know, that's what I think about first, and then sometimes we have to navigate a situation when NYPD shows up and it's an obvious overdose situation, and it's no regard. Oh, it's just an overdose, but this person had a life, you know. So it's a hard balance for me.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
I basically was going to say the same thing. I'm a program director at a residence for veterans, and we just opened it up to the community. But the deaths were usually just past COVID. We had, I think, 6 for the last 2 years deaths in the facility, and my case managers were new. And first time experiencing that and everything, and just like she stated, as a program director, I'm thinking paperwork. I'm thinking, and it almost seems like I have a wall where 15 years in the service, you just see so much death that you just, I guess, isolated yourself from it or something. And having this workshop is making me think, like, what can I do better for my staff? Because I'm the first one to say, okay, incident, let's do what we need to do, and not even thinking about that person needs to go home. You know what I'm saying? That person may need to go home, or, you know, like you said, have PTO or whatever. I'm not thinking like that. I'm thinking, what does the funder need? What do I need to do to the incident committee and stuff like that? And it's making me, at least bringing me back to my humane side instead of my administration side. You know, so thank you for that.
No, thank you so much for sharing that, and it made me like think. I've been in this situation like a couple times, and I think everybody deals with that differently. I vividly remember the last time, like, I had just walked into my job. But in that moment, like similar to you as staff members, we know our expectations. We know that the incident committee is going to review everything we do. And so we're faced with, do I cry? Do I get the paperwork? Call 911? Try to tell 911 I'm not going to touch anything? Go downstairs, get whatever like, you're on go. And so I think being able to go home is very helpful, something that my program director at the time, because I was a service coordinator before, my current position was kind of just sit and breathe with me, because I was just running like a chicken with no head, like, gotta get this, gotta get that, gotta, you know, do what I gotta do, and we just, you know, took a breather. I went home, but as the soul is mentioning, sometimes that's not enough. Like, there are people that you're closer with than others. There's a difference between finding someone you just see around, hello, versus someone that you're going to doctor's appointments with. You're making calls with them. You're going into their apartment. Like, it's that connection. So I think, like, the humane side, it's kind of what this committee really wants to push forth, because we forget sometimes because we have all this pressure from our funders.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a particular apartment that was a close person to me, and when he passed away, I still, like, there's a new tenant there, and I still get emotional, but anyway, every time I pass by the door, I think of him, and it's just like, you know, it's stuck through. I've been there 5 years, and this one particular tenant is kicking my butt. Like, I'm always thinking about him every time I pass there, and it's so traumatic. But I'm glad that we're able to, like, have somewhere, a space where we can talk about it, and it feels great. It's just like what you're feeling right now when you're opening up to us. That's how it feels when you know somebody knows where you're coming from, because it's different from your family. You're telling them what happened, or, you know, that you lost someone. They don't understand. They think it's just like another person. Oh, well, you know, it's part of your job. I'm like, I'm crying hysterical, like, I lost my old guy, you know, like, and they totally don't get it. So when you speak to someone like you guys, you know, it's different, and you know where I'm coming from, and you can empathize with what I'm going through. So it's very supportive.
I wanted to talk a little bit about something that we did at an agency that I worked at formerly. Was we had staff who, I'm an administrator, and they came to us to tell us how traumatizing it was when they found, you know, they went into units and found people who were deceased. And in response to that, we actually, you know, started developing like a protocol for it. And we actually started, like, from when people come in during their orientation, we talk to them about what the protocol is for when you're going to enter a unit when you have suspicions that there might be somebody who's either sick, unresponsive, or dead there. So we started talking about that and training people, and some of the things were like, never go in alone, you know, make sure you've talked to your supervisor ahead of time so you're all prepared for what you could find. We talk about what you possibly could find, and even that issue about the 911 person, because the staff said that to us. Oh, they kept telling us that we have to go, and so management said, listen, we know this is traumatizing. We accept that you do not have to go and check that that person's breathing. You can shut the door and tell them that you're just going to wait for the emergency responders to come. But some of those things was really in response to staff, because I think it's a very common experience about how
traumatizing it is.
No, thank you for sharing that. It is kind of, I saw the hands. So how about this? Can we move through the slides, and then we're gonna have that Q&A session, and then definitely I'm gonna not forget your hand.
She's over there with the remote.
And yes, and yeah, okay. So let's wait until Q&A. I'm gonna come, and I will not forget two hands. So that is also one thing that in progress for us too. We are gonna add an orientation and a training for our newcomers about our agency protocol, what to do, because and also after steps. So some things that in progress, that is this learning on the fly. The name might not say anything, but this is some gatherings that we outside of our programs.
We had the Grief Garden, and NYU students and visitors. Basically, the Grief Garden in NYU, we didn't get to do it because unfortunately the time was very hard to get all the documents because of COVID. They needed vaccination and all of that, so it was
Not
difficult.
accessible.
Right, not accessible. But it was nice, the thought of going there, because they had garden paper pieces designed as the shape of a leaf, and then you get to write something about the person that passed on, and they kind of attach it somewhere, and it's really nice because you get to see how everyone else is dealing with it, and you're not alone, basically. So I thought that was a good way to support each other. It would have been nice, but hopefully in the next one we'll go.
We will. Definitely, we are thinking about a visit to the other cemeteries in our big New York City. So Reimagine New York City, it is a resource, and then if you Google, you can see that they have been doing events around death and dying for years, even before COVID. Now most of their things are online, and New York City and San Francisco based. And then one of our goals is to host an event and head it in collaboration with Reimagine New York City. Drop-in sessions for advanced directors. I mentioned that we brought experts to our community, and that is good, and that is not the most sustainable model. We will continue to bring people, and at the same time we decided that can we do a drop-in session where we are not saying that we are experts, we are definitely giving legal or medical advice, but can we all together look at these documents, we can explain some of the documents, because now we feel okay, we learn and we can talk about it and introduce it, and then have the conversation with people in-house. And then for the legal part and assistance, we are going to link people to the experts, to sources. So we are going to start that, and on June 15 is going to be our very first drop-in advanced directive session. This is going to be primarily for participants, but of course we are going to say that staff are welcome too. So, and this is one of our trials, we want to try the drop-in, and then the second step is, can we all sit together, whoever hasn't completed their advanced directives, can we do some of them, and then can we bring the expert and everything signed? So we are thinking about all these steps that doing together, no staff participant and dichotomy. We are gonna prioritize our participants, but staff are welcome too. So that's in the works right now, very exciting. And other gatherings that our D&D poems, Writing for Grief, D&D playlist, that we are definitely hoping to bring more these events. And now with the summer, some of them we may do in outdoors where people don't feel they're at risk for being indoors. And lastly, this D&D as a pollinator, that again I said that we have health and wellness department. They're also doing a lot of farming. So our goal is to plant the seed in the program and then support the programs. But after that, we want them to take it over and really own it and then do their works. And then whenever they want our support, we are going to be there. So this is aspirational, things are in progress. And now we are coming to the moment that maybe there are some of you in this group, you may actually in a position of power that you can initiate a death and dying committee. But there might be other people who may doing direct service worker or program management, and you may not be in that position to start a D&D committee, agency-wide. So what is possible? first couple of things to consider, because we are doing a committee, everybody has different skill set. Some people in our committee members, right off the bat, they were very okay with the comfort level, with the knowledge, their meeting and group facilitation skills, because it's a group work, nobody has to do all those things. However, if you are trying to start it, some of these things you may have to consider that, like where you are, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to know everything perfectly, but it is good to like, okay, how do I feel about some of these? This is a starting point. And this values and personal experiences in general, I'm from Istanbul, Turkey, and in Turkey, at least in my family, in my immediate and larger circle, there was this custom and this belief system that, like, if you talk about death, you're gonna bring it. And okay, it is still in me, but I'm doing the job and I'm trying to like read and understand more, but it is in me. And I know that, okay, this value, how it is gonna come, because it never happened, but one day, coincidentally, I may have this conversation with someone and someone passes away because life happens. And I wanna make sure that I don't wanna connect the two because I'm already there. In my head, I'm like, oh my God, am I jinxed it? Am I did it? Like, did I bring it? So like, it could be other kind of values that you may have. Some of us may feel like maybe have a similar customs. Some of us may have some personal experiences that makes this conversation and this part of the job is easier. And that brings us to our comfort level. Yeah.
And I think that I've touched base on this a couple of times already, but being aware of how comfortable you are about talking about the topic, it's number one, you have to check in with yourself because you also don't want to like re-traumatize yourself or trigger yourself. But once you know what that comfort level is, again, lived experience is a mind gold, and I want to, just challenge everyone to try to dig deep and think about how we can make an impact with talking about how you feel, what you might want, and what steps can be taken.
Yeah, I think Duysal had mentioned in the past, we were talking about life insurance and how I was saying that somebody told me to do that as soon as I had my daughter. They're like, oh, you should have life insurance. I'm like, she's not dying. Like, why you So it's very, like, stressful when someone says that. And FYI, I haven't gotten it yet. But that's, something that I struggle with. But I know it's important for us to get these things rolling, so.
Yeah. So again, our personal and professional definitely overlaps. And the meeting and group facilitation skills is, like, it's important because time has like very value, and then some of these conversations may require like more advanced facilitation skills. Some of them could be like good for basic facilitation skills, and we're not necessarily say that like you need to be perfect. It's just like assess yourself, look at yourself, and then you may have some of these skills already, and this is like a good starting point. And now we are going to give some examples. Like if you're a direct service worker, there's one more step that you need to check in with your supervisor. But if you're a supervisor, some of these is like starting the conversation with folks who already have shared an interest. This could be like one step that like, okay, if you feel like I'm already comfortable, this is comfortable, somebody already shared their interest. The second thing could be organizing a gathering at your program. So it could be a movie screening. So we didn't do the Icebreaker to the fullest extent, but there are so many different movies that people might like, and it could be a movie screening. There is a documentary called Speaking Grief that is available in Vimeo. Very, very well done, but it is specifically about grief. And when we talk about death and dying, there are multiple aspects to that. Definitely, this is one thing that we'll suggest. And if you're organizing an event, if you're doing already a group, this could be one of the topics that like definitely bringing up. Inviting, so you decided to organize an event, it could be a smaller organization, and then bringing other programs. Like you can reach out to some programs that you may have maybe more closer relationship. either geographically or with the coworkers. There's definitely, and then it starts like, again, it's like a pollination. It might start with the seed, and then it can grow. And if you're in a position of a program director or direct service worker, this could be also a moment to show that there is interest. People are coming, staff are coming, conversations are happening. Can we do more?
Yes.
And the second, another thing that like maybe more complicated is inviting other organizations to talk about advanced directives. Some of them are doing it for free, and they can come because it also benefits for them. That could be one thing that is thinking about it. And maybe you'll do a learning on the fly too. And again, Woodlawn Cemetery, Greenwood Cemeteries, like visits there. It could be like an outdoors, and then after that, what we do when we go outdoors, we find a space where we can sit, talk, and reflect. And memorial celebrations of life and obituaries is more like, okay, maybe you are already doing it, because I heard like some of you are already doing it. And if you are not doing, again, starting small is one thing. And none of, like all these steps doesn't require a death and dying committee, but there is definitely, as a direct service worker, as a program manager, we can do things and bring things easily to our community. So before we go to Q&A, I'm looking at Kira. Can you read this?
I can, I think. Okay. So just a quick poem on death and dying. So farewell to thee, but not farewell to all my fondest thoughts of thee. Within my heart they still shall dwell, and they shall cheer and comfort me. This is Farewell by Anne Bronte.
So we're gonna go to our Q&A, and I remember two hands. One there. Oh, the gentleman. I cannot see the gentleman now. Okay, let's start from you.
Something that we've been talking about, we work at the same program, and I think it's about, for us, it's really helped to keep the conversation about grief really present with the clients and the staff, because we've experienced a lot of loss in the last couple of years, and I think that our tenants aging in place or passing away from an overdose or it's been very prominent, and it's part of the work, and I feel as if there's a lack of that of those conversations happening, and so it's been really important. And even in seeing us here today, you can just tell that we're all wanting to talk about it, and I think that that just needs to continue. And in being in management roles, you have to kick into gear the second it happens. And like I always say, finding someone will never get easier. And I don't want that to get easier, right? Like, you are gonna get better at moving through the motions of figuring out like how you wanna support your staff, like when do you make the report, those things, right? Like as you move through the work. But it's been important for us to take a step and actually acknowledge that although something happened to the tenant, something's also happening to you. And how you navigate that and make sure that you're taking care of yourself has been really important. So I liked what someone said about bringing it into the trainings, or even when we interview people, we're very upfront about this is part of the work. How do you work through that for yourself?
Thank you. Thank you. Questions? I can't see the gentleman anymore. Yeah, but there's a question there. Yes.
Hi. So we talked about, you know, doing the advanced directives and all that, but the other piece to executing tenants' wishes or clients is the financial aspect of all of this.
Yes.
I work in a resident building where they're HIV AIDS. So while there is insurance for that, the wait time is 2 years. So if the person purchases a plan and dies within that, before that 2 years is up, they don't actually get to access that money that they've been, paying towards, only the money that they paid, which is not gonna amount to anything. So, tenants can have all these directives, I want this, I want that, but it boils down to what ultimately the family or a friend or whomever is designated that has the money to pay for that. So, like, what are the other resources or, things that I am not aware of that I can provide to my tenants to say, listen, you can have these things, but, you also got to have the money to do so as well. And that goes for everybody in here. The burden of death can be placed upon your family members, and they're not going to have the money. You may have all these elaborate ideas. I want the DJ, I want a comedian, I want to be tossed off a boat, my ashes spread, and then when it goes to the money, well, you're just going to get cremated.
Yeah.
So,
Even if it's against their will to be cremated, that would be the end result of it.
I mean, in our
right, it's funerals, burials, you're talking about $10,000 off the rip.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, again, when we are having these conversations, I think bringing up the financial aspect of it, and I know that in our agency, when there's no funds coming from the person or the family, agency chime in as much as they can. But there's a limit to what agency can do, and they may not fulfill 100% of person's wish. And I think that is also another real conversation with the person. Is just like, okay, there are definitely funding resources, but like they are not gonna resource like really the way they imagine. And there, I am thinking, we haven't fundraised for a memorial like that. We haven't, and I'm just like thinking that could be one option. And I see a hand here.
So I recently had a situation with a caseworker thought the woman had insurance. She did have insurance.
Yes.
She's transferred to a nursing home. They took all her money. Her insurance lapsed. It was a disaster. Every did me and did the agency. The whole agency wanted to like kill me because they thought I should have paid for the funeral. I ended up dealing with Catholic Charities, who has a space with sort of a communal burial space, and it was only $85 for the plaque. We were able to do our own memorial, and it was a big deal for really for the staff to be able to memorialize this person. So there are other resources in a pinch, but we've also been looking at ways to have a fund set aside for people who find themselves in this situation, and it's very difficult and, like you say, very expensive.
Yes.
And the public administrator's office is a nightmare.
Yeah.
While we were waiting a question, we do have our opera moment. So if you all can lean over and then touch the bottom of your chairs, 3 of you will have a post-it. 1 in this side, 2 in this side. Yes. Okay, the other two is on this side, around the middle area, and a little bit towards the back.
Two more. You want me to bring it
Let's see what they have like. I think we have time.
Okay, we got a second one. One more. It should be in the back somewhere.
Okay, while you are searching for that,
yeah. Did we find the last one in the back?
yes, that is the last one in the back.
Woo! Okay, great.
So, okay, the first I'm coming. Okay, so our opera moment was this It's a game. It's called Death Tech. There are a bunch of questions in this deck. We are not 100% approving all the framing of the questions. Some of them are a little bit like, okay, this is not what we would ask. However, this is definitely a conversation starter, and it's not very expensive. But for those of you who can come and we can afford, we want to. But yeah. So this is definitely one resource, like these kind of games. But there are other resources, especially the Conversation Clinic is amazing, and they did an amazing job. Definitely amazing job in terms of identifying questions that you can start conversations with people about, like, okay, what is the biggest thing that matters for you when you may be in a terminally ill situation? And then most questions are really like, you can have the conversation, you can start the conversation. Some of them are geared towards people who are terminally ill, but some of them are not. So we strongly suggest, and I think I did one mistake, and I didn't put the emails. I don't know after all those years how I do that mistake. But if I can type right now, I cannot, I guess. So if you want the emails, please come. We'll definitely give the emails. I'm so sorry for my oversight. But these are some resources, and these are national, and there are specific New York City resources too. And I am so thankful for all of you and joining today for us. Thank you. I am also very thankful and so grateful for my two colleagues who are presenting today, Cinthia and Kira. And Carlene. Carlene is in the audience. She's doing amazing work with our group too. Thank you so much, everyone.